Hello and shalom to everyone. How are you doing this evening?
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Mario. All right. Rookie Shem Yawa.
Shalom.
Yahuwah. We are so glad and blessed to be part of Covenant Calendar Club. And for those of you that are viewing us on YouTube, we just want to give you a warm shout out, a warm welcome. We're glad that you're here as well. We pray that you will be blessed. Let's give a warm shout out to those that are watching the video. Shalom. Hello, everyone.
Hello.
All right. Hello, Israel.
Yeah.
We are extremely
Amen.
hello. We are extremely blessed tonight to be having a study on a very controversial yet exciting topic regarding the moon. And so we're just going to go ahead and get started at this time. I'd like to go ahead and turn the video over to whoever's going to be doing the presentation. Is that you, Tim, or Charlene? However that works out. And we'll go ahead and get started. Here we go.
Can everybody see my screen, everyone?
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it. Looks good.
Looks good.
We're ready.
Okay, so I can
See it.
Okay, I guess we're ready to go, are we? This is called The Moon, Oh the Moon. And we've been waiting a long time for this, and I just wanted to let you know that this is only the beginning. This is probably the easiest presentation of all of them. So we just want to have your full attention tonight. And I'm having trouble getting these pictures, but we'll figure it out. Okay. Let's get started. If I can decrease these pictures. Is the moon really in charge of the scriptural month? That is our question for this whole series, because we've had a lot of people say that the moon is in charge of the festival month, and we want to know for sure. And the question is, which scriptural month do you think it could be? Because everybody, there's two of them. There's two different kinds of months. This is something that we had to learn. So which month is the moon in charge of? That is a very good question, and it's one that you need to remember. And it deserves to have an answer from the scriptures. The truth is, Yahuwah's month is in charge of a month, but is it the calendar month? Is the moon in charge of Yahuwah's way, the worship cycles, which utilize his set-apart 30-day month and also aligns magnificently with his annual worship statutes? And more additional comments that I would like you to think about right now. The search in this study is to determine if the 3394 moon month is related to Yahuwah's set-apart feasts and festival cycles. That's what we're looking for. And all comments about the moon commencing any month will be intentionally compared to Yahuwah's set-apart, celestially coordinated months for his worship statutes. So if anybody is confused, as I'm starting out here, just break open your mic and let's stop right here, because we're going to be talking about two different kinds of months. I'm not identifying them completely this teaching session, but that is going to be coming. So point number 6, for the 3391 Hebrew number, the moon month is going to be discussed at length, and we'll be doing that in about 2 more teaching sessions. So we're using a lot of numbers. Tonight we're going to be looking at 3394. I'm so hungry, I could eat at a pauper's table, or do you want to eat at the king's table? How hungry really are you? And I would just like to say that the study on the moon is the real meal deal. And Scripture is going to describe what the moon's mandate is, so that when we're done with all the studies on the moon, you're going to know exactly where you stand with this moon situation. We can know the mandate of the moon in just a few minutes, but some people don't know what that means. So let's look at the definition first. It is an official order or a commission to do something. And some synonyms are instruction, a directive, a decree, a command, an order, a charge, a formal ordinance. So a mandate for the moon is instruction for the moon, it's a directive, it's a command for the moon, but we want to know what exactly is that command from Yahuwah. And I'm going to tell you, in a few minutes, you can discover exactly that the moon is not in charge of Yahuwah's set-apart month with a very simple examination in Torah. However, you may not know how to explain Psalms 104:19. And this is what it says. He appointed the moon for seasons. Now, I can show you probably in 15 minutes how to know that the moon is not in charge of the months, but you won't know what to do with Psalms 104:19. I'd like to tell you that there is a hidden secret in the Torah. The moon is not in charge of Yahuwah's set-apart months, but the moon is under other divine mandates that are very, very interesting. We want to know what that is. How many of you have been taught Torah, Torah, Torah? Everything has to come out of Torah. That's what I was taught. And we know that the foundation of all scriptural truth must be found in Torah. And the question is, would that include the study of Yahuwah's calendar? Should it, can it, and will it? Can it come out of Torah? And have you heard this? This is just what I heard like about 3 weeks ago. Today it is no longer Torah, Torah, Torah. It is this from Isaiah 8:20, to the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. In other words, this is what I was told. Torah is not complete for the full calendar study. One definitely has to look outside of Torah to find the pure truth for calendar. And I went, really? When did that happen? Obviously, these people haven't studied the calendar like we have. So the question is, could it really be true that Torah is deficient? Well, here's that verse from Isaiah 8:20. To the law, and when you look it up, it's Torah 8451. Law means Torah. And to the testimony, which is a precept, that's 8584. We're going to look at these words. If they speak not according to this word. So what is that? Is that the word of Torah, or is that the word of a testimony? Well, I thought maybe we should look up law, which is 8451, and it says Torah. And it says from 3384, which is a precept or a statute, especially the Decalogue or the Pentateuch. Well, that sounded easy enough. I know what the Decalogue is. That's Genesis to Deuteronomy. So I know what Torah is. So that's what it says, to the law or to the Torah. Well, let's go ahead and look at the definition for testimony. Because is testimony above Torah, or is Torah above testimony, or are they on the same level? Well, testimony is 8584, and it says it's an attestation. For example, a precept, and precept here is 6673, and it says usage. And then again, it uses the word testimony. But anyway, I went and looked up precept, and 6673 in the Isaiah 28 context is talking about the word of Yahuwah. It is a divine commandment. So testimony here is saying that it's a divine commandment. But there is another word for precept. It's 4687. I looked up those, quite a few of those verses, and it said it was a command, and it could be either divine or human. So precept can mean both. So this is saying a precept of 6673. Well, let's look up 5749, because it says that testimony 8584 is from 5749. And look what it says here. It is the primitive root. It is to duplicate or repeat, by implication to protest or testify, as by reiteration. And then it says intensively, to encompass, restore, as a sort of reduplication. Just incredible definitions here. This is the testimony for the Torah. Don't forget that. It means to admonish, charge, earnestly, lift up, protest, call, to record. I just need to read these. Relieve, rob, I'm not sure where that fits in. Solemnly, stand upright, and to testify and give a warning. Bear, call to, give, take to. How about a witness? There's a lot of adjectives here to tell us what a testimony is. A testimony that is working with Torah. So, in other words, this is what testimony is saying for this word 8584. The testimonies of the non-Torah books must intensively duplicate or repeat the Torah, reiterate the Torah, restore the Torah, encompass the Torah, admonish the Torah, lift up the Torah. They have to testify of the Torah, stand upright with Torah, give warning with Torah, be a witness of Torah. And that was 10. There was a whole lot more. In other words, the Torah is not canceled, not now and not ever. These testimonies are rooted in Torah because Torah is light to the law and to the testimony. Testimony is going back to Torah. Well, let's look at that word light in Isaiah 8:20. It says, to the law and to the testimony. If they speak not according to this word, it is because there is no light in them. I noticed that the word light is 7837. But first of all, I thought we should look at the word light from Genesis 1:3, because that's the very first time that light is mentioned in the Torah. And we all know, I think, that this is 2:16. It is or. It means illumination, or the concrete is the luminary. But now compare this light definition to the light definition of Isaiah 8:20. It is 7837. It is shakar from 7836. Look, everyone, it says dawn, either literal, figurative, or adverbial. And then it says day spring, early, light, morning, whence it rises. And I thought that is very interesting. To the law and to the testimony, if they don't speak according to this word, it's because there's no dawning, there's no early light. They're not getting it. It's not dawning on them. So does Isaiah have a special message for us? Because he didn't use 2:16. He used 7837. There is a warning, everyone. Is the sheep really a wolf? We need to be careful what we're looking at when we're looking at the verses. For the moon component in the covenant calendar study, don't let anyone tell you that you have to go outside of Torah to find the true calendar, because it absolutely is not true. The covenant calendar of Yahuwah is found completely within Torah pages. It's located, what I say, in covenant Torah. Let me explain what I mean by covenant Torah. For all of the covenant calendar studies, this term is going to refer to only the everlasting covenant found between Genesis 1 and Exodus 24:11. Also, it will be referred to as covenant Torah. So when I say covenant Torah, I'm talking about those pages between Genesis 1 and Exodus 24:11. In my Bible, it is about 75 pages. This covenant calendar easily establishes the day start and the year start components. Both are completely found within Covenant Torah pages, exactly where the everlasting Melchizedek covenant is found. And I just want to show you some studies that demonstrate how the covenant calendar is explained. I don't know why I've got a green W there on my screen. I'm not sure where that came from. But anyway, this is a little list of the day start studies that are found in Covenant Torah. That's Genesis 1 to Exodus 24:11. And we're not going to go through each one of them, but we have found 10 studies in these Covenant Torah pages between Genesis 1 and Exodus 19 to 20. So we have a total of 10 witnesses here for the day start beginning at dawn. What about day start studies that come after Covenant Torah? That's after Exodus 24:12. There are 2 day start studies in the Torah in Leviticus 7 and 23. And then there are 15 day starts in non-Torah books in the rest of the Tanakh, all the way from Joshua up to Jonah. So when you add those all up with the ones that you had in Covenant Torah, there's a total of 27 witnesses just in the Tanakh for the day start study. But remember, the 15 non-Torah witnesses for day start have to agree with the Torah witnesses that we have. They have to all be in agreement. The festal year start in the Covenant Torah is something that we need to look at because it's important too, how the year starts to give us our feasts and festivals. In Exodus 34:12, and that is a Torah-only scripture, not Covenant Torah. And if there's any confusion here, write your questions down, okay? We've got our page numbers up here, or they'll be down in the corner. So just save your questions. But for Exodus 34:22, this is where it gives us the civil year start. And that is linked to the autumn equinox along with the Feast of Ingathering, because there's 2 calendars in the scriptures. There's a civil calendar, and then we have our festival calendar. So the festival calendar and the year start is linked to the spring equinox, or the Tekufa, and that is in Covenant Torah. Right there in Exodus 12:2, we find where Passover was to be celebrated in the first month of the year. And we know it was the first month of the year because Exodus 9:31 told us that this was the time of the year when the barley and the flax was smitten. We knew that was in the spring. So the festival year start and the month start are going to be linked together very tightly. So there you have your spring Tekufa right there in Covenant Torah. And I just have some questions, and I hope that they're reasonable for you. Let's go through them. Because there are 10 witnesses for the day start in Covenant Torah verses, would it not seem reasonable to find at least 2 or 3 witnesses for a set-apart moon month start in the Covenant Torah as well? I wonder if you know what I mean by that. We've got 10 witnesses for the day start in our Covenant Torah verses. So wouldn't it be reasonable that we should find at least 2 to 3 witnesses in the Covenant Torah for the month start, for the set-apart months? Is it even reasonable to expect to find at least 2 to 3 witnesses in all 5 Torah books for a moon month, not just limiting it to Covenant Torah? Do the scriptures allow for the option to establish a sacred moon month from only non-Torah books? That is an important question. Are we allowed to have our month start documented in only non-Torah books for Yahuwah's calendar? That is what the question is. So what do you think you can expect from this study? The full study on the moon component of the covenant calendar is going to prove beyond a shadow of any doubt that the moon is not part of Yahuwah's sacred calendar, and everything that can be considered is going to be considered in full. I am going to give you the full meal deal in these studies. We aren't going to miss out on anything. So here's another question. Were the patriarchs, prophets, and the kings, were they Torah teachers? Or did the patriarchs, prophets, and kings teach laws from non-Torah books? And if they did, what is a non-Torah book for the Tanakh teachers? That's what I'm kind of wondering too. Something to think about it. In the comprehensive study on the moon, we are going to investigate 12 great leaders that are around these 20 new moon verses that we'll be going through eventually to see if these 12 leaders taught from Moses' Torah or if they were teaching from other books. These are 12 leaders and that actually are involved with these 20 verses, and we'll be going through these eventually, not today, but just to give you an idea where the study is going. Now, some claim that Yahuwah's set-apart month begins with the first sliver of the moon. Some say with the full moon. Some say it's a combination of the crescent moon and the ripening of the barley, and we went through a whole bunch of options there with the equinox PowerPoint. And others claim the festal month begins around the equinox calculations, and then there's some that use the sliver moon and the full moon. It's just like there's no end to calendars. And some are surprised that the moon has absolutely nothing to do with the start of Yahuwah's set-apart month. I had this question asked to me just on May the 7th. Charlene, how can you know when the month begins if you are not looking at the moon? In fact, she said, I just don't understand that. Well, I said, it's easy. You just have to count. And they didn't understand that. It is interesting that the word of Yahuwah never, ever instructs his people to cite any phase of the moon in the sky. There is not one place in the original Hebrew scriptures where Yahuwah points directly to the moon as an authority over set-apart time for the feasts and festivals. So, if a teaching is not found in Scripture, why should it be practiced as if it is there? That is our question. That was about in 2013 when we asked that question. Can't figure that one out. So I just wanted to take a little trip to briefly examine some history. This is about 13 or 14 slides. For Jericho, for Jeremiah, for the Karaites, for the Hindus, and for Islam. Now, I probably could have left this little piece of information for the history in another teaching, but I thought I would just give you a heads up on what's happening, you know, where the moon fits into Jericho and the Karaites and the Hindus and with Islam, just to give you an idea. So it's only about 12 or 13 slides, maybe only 11. So let's start with Jericho. This is approximately in 1451 BC. It was the city of the moon. You can see on the monument right there, if you look closely, it actually says Jericho, the city of the moon. That's why it had to be destroyed. Yahuwah tells us explicitly the moon is not to be followed. He destroyed Jericho and he placed a curse on the one who rebuilds it. The Hebrew language reveals a deeper understanding that the curse is placed upon the ones who actually rebuild the worship practices of the moon. And we sure do know there's a lot of moon calendars out there. I think it was Eric Bissell said he knew about 26 different moon calendars, and that was in 2014. So anyone that's rebuilding that moon calendar, that's rebuilding this worship of the moon. That is why the moon of Revelation 12 is placed under the feet of the bride. We already had that study. Very important study. Let's just look at one verse of Jeremiah in chapter 8, verses 1 and 2. This is about 600 BC. It says, at that time, declares Yahuwah, they shall bring the bones of the sovereigns of Judah and the bones of its heads and the bones of the priests and the bones of the prophets and the bones of the inhabitants of Jerusalem out of their graves. And this is what they're going to do. They shall spread them before the sun and the moon and all the host of heavens. Why? Here's the reason. Which they have loved. These are the people from Jerusalem. They have loved the worship of the sun and the moon. They have served it, they have walked after it, and they have sought it, and to which they had bowed themselves, they shall be for dung on the face of the earth. That is a very strong scripture, and it is in direct violation of Deuteronomy 18:9, which was approximately 1450 BC, where it says, "Thou shalt not learn to do after the abominations of those nations." The other nations were worshiping the sun and the moon, and Moses gave a direct command, you are not to learn the ways of the pagans. That is an abomination. So between 1400 BC to 600, we've got about 800 years, and this is the point where they were at. We're going to study all of that history as well. Let's look at the Karaites. This is approximately moving up to around 200 BC. A little information here from Fossilized Customs. One source claims that certain sects developed a procedure that involved the sighting of the moon by two witnesses. This is believed to be correct by many today, and this sect is called the Karaites. And the source of this practice is from rabbinic Jewish oral law, or the Mishnah. It is not coming from Torah. So another question, watch for this one. Do the Karaites connect to Islam? Just keep that in the back of your mind for right now. The Karaite connection, what is it between Hinduism and Islam? Well, this is just a little bit of history here on this one slide, and you could probably do 2 or 3 hours of study in a PowerPoint, but I'm just going to give you a little bit of history today. A man by the name Anan ben Dod is widely believed to be the founder of the Karaite sect, but in the mid-8th century, under Islamic rule, he started a movement which broke away from rabbinical Judaism. It was Anan's hope to become the head rabbi, but guess what? He was passed over by his younger brother, who was holding very closely to the Torah and the oral law, the traditions of the fathers. But Anan's followers said, no, we want to have you as the Jewish leader. We don't want your younger brother. We want you. Well, the Caliph, he viewed this argument as rebellion. And he said, I'm not going to put up with that. And he arrested Anan in 767. And he set an execution date. But guess what? While he's in prison, Anan met an Islamic teacher who gave him some advice that saved his life. Look what happened. Anan was to establish a new religious sect based on moon observation, not perpetual calculation. And I think this perpetual calculation was Hillel II's calendar that was brought in about 360 AD after Constantine. Remember, we had that little study on Constantine. And Hillel II's calendar is completely done by calculation, and kind of when the first full moon after the equinox. I believe that's the way it works. But anyway, this was what the Islamic teacher said. He said, we can get you out of trouble here. So since 1500 BC, this is now long before the birth of Islam, there were 360 deities that surrounded the Kaaba. Originally, this was a Hindu shrine dedicated to the worship of the host of heaven. And I have a little diagram there of what the Kaaba looked like. And they had 360 deities that surrounded this temple or their little sanctuary. And the crescent moon was the symbol of Lord Shiva, a god of the Hindus. I have a picture of him there. Out of all of the deities that were worshipped by the pre-Islamic Arabs, the greatest deity was called Allah. Okay, so there's Lord Shiva, and the symbol of Lord Shiva is the crescent moon. You can see it there up in his hair if you take a really good close look. Now, the question is, do Hindus and Muslims connect? Because it looks like there could be a connection here. So let's just do a little review of Anand Ben Dodd. Remember, he was the founder of the Karaite sect. He did not believe in the Mishnah like the modern Karaites. Okay, that's something to remember. And remember, he broke away from rabbinical Judaism, and then there was an execution date set for him because of the rebellion against the Mishnah Karaites. He was in big trouble. And then, lucky for him, he met an Islamic teacher when he was in prison, and his life was spared by the establishment of a new religious sect based on crescent moon observation, following Muslim practice. So we have Islam, we have Hindus, and we have Karaite Jews. Is Anand Dodd the connecting link between the Hindu Lord Shiva, the Karaite Jews, and Islam? They all have similar ways of worship, and they all come from about the same area. And you know what? They all have the crescent moon, and lots of them have the star linked with it. So is Anand Dodd the connecting link? Islam's most prominent symbol is a crescent moon, and you will see it on the top of their temples or their mosques, lots of times with a star right inside of the crescent moon. You can find these pictures all over the internet. So there's history long before Islam. The pre-Islamic moon deity called Allah is symbolized by a crescent moon and a star. You can see it right there as well in the Lord Shiva. This origin is rooted in the Hindu culture of the worship of the Hindu Lord Shiva. And the crescent moon was also venerated in the Egyptian culture with the moon disk below a solar disk. And you can see there's two pictures there in this Egyptian relief. So the crescent moon and the star, especially the crescent moon, were very popular with all of these religious cultures. Now let's move up to Islam, which is approximately 610 AD. Allah is represented by the crescent moon, and he became the most favored of all 360 deities by Muhammad's clan, adopting the star crescent moon symbol. And I also found today that Allah is not a name. It is a title likened to Elohim. It is really not a name. And what you see there in that very interesting little blue square there where it says the one and only God, that is how you write the word Allah. But it is not a name. I didn't know that. Anyway, I would just like you to note that Islam's most prominent symbol is the crescent moon, and it is the very same as Shiva's symbol, Lord Shiva, from the Hindus. Yahuwah is not represented by any kind of pagan symbol, and certainly he is not going to be using objects seen in the sky to determine his appointed times. Yahweh has nothing to do with these crescent moons that are linked to pagan worship practices. It is no surprise Islam adopted the moon, is it? Hindus, Muslims, Karaites, Rabbinic Jews, and there's quite a few others, they are all from the same territory, and it is no wonder that their religious cultures have similarities, especially with having this crescent moon in their worship practices. But Christianity also has roots in Alexandria, Egypt, where these objects in the sky were also adopted for veneration. So the common thread between these pagan nations seems to be the moon. In fact, the crescent moon. The very crescent moon that most of the feast and festival calendars use today. There's a few now that are using the full moon to start their month. So let's remember Revelation 12. And if you have to go back and review that PowerPoint, please do, about the woman standing on the moon. It says, "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon under her feet, and upon her head was a crown of 12 stars. The light of the sun illuminates the bride. The moon was trampled underfoot because it's of no value to the bride's calendar. It is absolutely not in Yahuwah's calendar. The bride has risen above the moon deception, that the moon commences the set-apart months for calculating Yahuwah's feasts and festivals, I firmly believe the bride will know the moon has nothing to do with this wonderful, divine, sacred calendar. Because most of us have been taught that the moon is in charge of commencing Yahuwah's set-apart month, this is a concept that must be challenged to see if it is true. And in this study, there are 5 different Hebrew words that have been translated as moon or moons. And we want to know, will any of these 5 words actually confirm the moon for Yahuwah's month start? There's going to be 5 of them. So we should be able to find at least one that says, yes, the month has to start with the moon. But before we get into that, I just want to do another little workup about some true and false. I have found that truth does not fight to have a place in the heart of man. It simply presents itself, take it or leave it, and that's it. And I'm finding that a lot of people do not want to take it. They just leave it behind. But I've also been finding that error, especially these pagan errors that are linked to abominations of worshiping the sun and the moon, that specifically counter Yahuwah's truths, it resists at all cost of being replaced by truth. I just am just amazed at when you try to share there is no moon month with the people that are using the month for their calendars. The resistance is absolutely incredible. They do not want to hear it. We actually went over a letter last week of Gretchen, who just didn't want to hear anything about it. So what is the truth about this moon month? Is it true or false that the moon is not in charge of the month? Is it really in charge of determining when Yahuwah's set-apart month begins, or is it not? But we need to rightly divide the truth. We're not going to just rightly divide truth from error. We need to rightly divide the truth. And we're going to do this through using the scriptures. We're going to use secular history. And the reason why is because there are pagan errors that are recorded in history, and we are finding that those historical quotes are wrestling to have prominence above Torah truth. I would just like to let everybody know that you can find historical quotes for anything you want to support. If you have divided the word of Yahweh incorrectly, you can find a historical quote to back you up. So you need to divide the word correctly and then look for the historical quotes that line up. 2 Timothy 2:5 tells us to study and research and show ourselves approved. So when we have our study and our research from cover to cover, and we've looked for our history and we find it aligns with what we found in Scripture, it's easier to make a good decision when you have a lot of evidence. And we're going to actually show evidence of that. So I just want to go through 10 points of kind of what we're going to find as we go through the whole moon study, not just today. Point number 1, there is no indication in the Tanakh or the Old Testament for a lunar month of 28 to 29 and a half days, or 13 months, that would be a leap month, in a year, approximately every 3rd year or 7 times in a 19-year cycle. You cannot find it anywhere in the Tanakh. At creation, the 12 calendar months had 30 days each, and we know the year had 360 days. These are all beautiful, perfect numbers of Yahuwah. Number 3, there are no Torah instructions for beginning Yahuwah's set-apart month with any phase of the moon. The Torah books date to approximately 1450 BC. Everybody, that's 2,550 years after creation. That's a long time. The covenant calendar in Exodus documents Yahuwah's 30-day month very, very well. Point number 4, Yahuwah's divine calendar was compromised by his people when they were in Canaan. They began to mix pagan worship practices with divine commands. They were told not to do this. In fact, many times they were commanded not to look to the sun or the moon the stars, the planets, or any of the heavenly hosts, lest they worship them, just like the pagans were doing. We'll be looking at these scriptures here in a little bit, but the commands were there. But of all the heavenly hosts, the lunar cycle is closest to Yahuwah's 30-day calendar month. We need to remember the pagans were moon worshippers, and they had their own month, and they had their own feasts and their festivals. The pivotal point in this whole puzzle is going to be Hezekiah's sundial around approximately 701 BC. These dates will all be approximate, okay? So let's look at point number 7. Hezekiah's sundial miracle happened about 3,300 years after creation. The sundial event changed the lunar cycle significantly. We're going to show that eventually. Yahuwah arranged for this on purpose to draw the attention of his people away from the moon, back to his creation order for the annual count of the festival Sabbaths. He needed to do something to get their attention, and this was it, Hezekiah's sundial. Point number 8, in a study of the scriptural fact, along with dates, we will see that the sundial event was intended to permanently separate Yahuwah's feast worship times from the pagan lunar cycle calculations. The dates in this study are really important. We've got 20 verses that we'll be looking at eventually, not today, but the dates are what break open this study, just to let you know. However, there is one event that did not change when the Earth's year length changed from 360 to 365 and a quarter days a year. I bet you all know that that event was the equinox. That did not change. We have 2 more points. From creation, the earth has provided sowing and reaping seasons. And the moon is agriculturally involved with these seasons. Excuse me. The equinox is the one-day focal point each year that marks the last day of Yahuwah's covenant calendar year, and that would be the last day of winter in the northern hemisphere. And then Yahuwah's New Year begins the very next day after the equinox, and that's going to be the first day of his first month of the new year. And that's pretty easy. The moon has absolutely no involvement in the equinox event the way the earth, the sun, and the stars do. Light is also involved in the equinox, and the moon doesn't have a thing to offer with light. So this is a preview. 3,300 years from creation to Hezekiah. The moon cycle for those 3,300 years was, I agree, 100%. It was 30 days per month. It was perfect. But it was finally disrupted by the sundial miracle around 700 BC. And that was a permanent heavenly demarcation, or it was a sign to Yahuwah's people that the moon is not associated with the commencement of his festal months. Unfortunately, the apostasy of Yahuwah's people with regards to worship was so deep and it was so severe that the northern 10 tribes were completely scattered by Assyria, and that was in 721, about 5 years after Hezekiah's reformation, a huge reformation. And also about 100 years later, the southern kingdom of Judah, they were finally exiled to Babylon for 70 years because they didn't listen either. They did exactly what their northern sister did. Well, Yahuwah's people and pagan worship, pretty closely linked. Upon return to Jerusalem, after being in Babylon, and this would have been about 536 BC, Judah was supposed to leave the pagan ways behind. They should have learned their lesson. They were there for 70 years. But did they leave it behind? No, they didn't. In fact, they came back with more paganism. The so-called Jews of today, or the Orthodox Messianic, as well as many other feast camps, Hebrew roots, whoever is following basically a Jewish calendar, most of them are still gazing at the moon, just like Babylon, just like Egypt, just like Islam. and just like every other pagan nation has been practicing for eons of time. And we were doing it too. We did it for a long time. So what to expect from the moon study? Well, there'll be a history of how Yahuwah's people wandered away from his Torah truths. And we want to find out just which of Yahuwah's servants really tried hard to keep his people on track. We're going to look at, what did I say, 12 of them? And we're going to look at how the pagan roots of moon worship became tradition, and later they became known as Torah truth. That's a real sadness. Is the sacred regard for the moon about the same as pagan moon worship? I want to tell you, friends, you start asking that question, you really get into trouble. Because when you say you're not supposed to look to the moon because that's really regarded as moon worship, you will hear all kinds of nasty words. But sacred regard, looking at the moon and using it to pinpoint your moon month, that is sacred regard, and that does, to me, sound like worship. The main point of this study is that the pagan moon worship crept in very, very early among Yahuwah's people. I did not realize how soon it had crept in, and we'll be doing that study too. But Yahuwah gave them a sign to bring them back. And the question is, did they recognize the sign was for them? And the question for us is, will we, as Yahuwah's people of today, follow Israel's apostasy, or shall we heed the Torah worship guidelines? Are we going to be given a sign so that we know what's going on? I think we will. And this is a challenge because we might have some people that are watching this PowerPoint that do follow the moon to calculate their festival months. For those following the lunar cycles to mark any type of worship statutes, I think that this study will test your belief system. You will have to think about it very carefully. Job descriptions of the moon. Who ever heard of that? That's what we finally discovered. Ordinances of the moon are given by the Creator at creation. Is the moon month Yahuwah's set-apart month, or is it for another type of ordinance? And there are some questions. I have lots of questions that I want you to think about. Has mankind added job descriptions to the moon outside of what the Creator has given? Number 2, does the moon have a prominent position which it does not deserve when it comes to the observance of set-apart feasts and festivals? Is the moon getting a position that it really doesn't deserve? And would it be important to know the divine ordinances of the moon, and where are you going to find them? And would those divine ordinances help you to separate that moon away from calculating festival months? Well, we're just going to get started with some simple tools. I just used the Strong's Concordance for this study and the Englishman's Concordance. And for those of you that don't know, the Strong's Concordance searches by Hebrew words, and the words that we're going to be using are moon and moons. And the Englishman's Concordance searches by Hebrew number, like 3394, 3391. So that's the difference between these two study tools. And there is a variety of good computer and online programs as well. Now, when we were going through this, I don't know, but 2 or 3 weeks ago, we were comparing computer study tools with each other. And the eSword program is one that I am not using. I'm using another program for my research, but in my program, it separates out the Englishman's Concordance. In the eSword, apparently it doesn't separate it out the same way that mine does. So you're going to get sort of everything. In the eSword, I believe you research by word and then you research by number. I've looked at it, and it doesn't seem to be quite as easy as my program. So I'll have some tools up here that will show you. You might not recognize them because the eSword doesn't work the same way. So let's get started with Strong's. I just would like you to know that this study was conducted from the Tanakh. I did not go into the New Testament, and we were looking up all the scriptures using the word moon and moons. Okay, that's how this study started. And then I needed to examine those Hebrew definitions of each of the word numbers that came with the word moon or moons. But before we start looking at it, for those that maybe don't know, there's something that I want you to understand about Hebrew definitions. Now, this is a fact. As in other languages, Hebrew words can have different definitions within one word number. And we've learned this from the word evening, which is 6153, Rev. The first definition is dusk, and it does say in the Strongs that the second one is day, and the third definition is evening or eventide. That's an old English word, about the same as dusk. And it does have a fourth definition of night. But the words dusk, day, and night are all opposites. They are not the same. So this one word, 6153, can have three different definitions. So when you're looking at 6153, you need to choose the correct definition that would fit the context of your verse or your chapter or whatever you're looking at. Number two, there can be several different Hebrew word numbers to define this same word. For instance, definition of love, I went and looked it up, and oh my goodness, in the Old Testament alone, there are 10 different Hebrew word numbers and meanings for the word love. So there you have to be very, very careful what you're choosing for definitions. Okay, so when I did the Strong's Concordance search, I put in the word moon and moons, and it came up with 5 numbers. The first one is 3394. That was the first number that showed up, and there were 26 listings, and there is the Hebrew pronunciation, Yareach. Then the second number that I found was 3391. There was only 2. Now this is in the Strongs. There was only 2, Yarek. The next number that showed up for moon or moons was 3842. There was 3 listings, and it said Labana. And the next number that showed up was 7720. Strong's only had 1 listing, and it was Saharan. And then there was one more. 2320, it had 20 listings, and it is Kodesh, for a total of 52 references. I looked at that and I went, oh my goodness. So I had a question. How could there be so many different Hebrew word numbers for one moon in the sky? I really was scratching my head. It's like, isn't one number enough? Like, why do we need 5 of them? So here they are. I've listed them out again for you. And after I started my study, about 8 months later, or maybe 9, I discovered that we have to look at the part of speech. And this is what I found. I'll give you a clue right up front. The 3394 is a noun. It's talking about the literal moon. 3391 is the verb component. It's talking about the lunation cycle. So a lunation cycle is something that's moving. That would be your verb. Remember, we talked about in Grammar 101, you need to know your nouns, your verbs, and your adjectives. 3842 had 3 listings, and it was the adjective component. It tells you about the color of the moon. And then there's 7720. This one is the simile. It's the one that compares the moon, the shape of the moon, to a pendant on a camel or someone wearing a necklace that has a crescent moon. It's a comparison. And then there's 2320. And this is a repetition. It's also a verb. So we have a noun and a verb and an adjective and a simile, and then we have another verb. So then I had another question. Are there really 2 verb forms for one moon? Like, what is happening? I didn't know what to do with that, but we just are going to keep looking, aren't we? So let's take a closer look. We are only going to look at part of the study for 3394 today. It is the noun component, and this is the literal moon in the sky. There were 26 identical scripture references that were found in both the Strong's and the Englishman's. I compared them, They were exactly the same scriptures. So in today's study, we're going to take these 26 verses, and I've sorted them into 4 different categories because I wanted to see what was happening. But first we should look at the definition. It is 3394 Yareak. Yareak, or however you say it. Someone can help me out with that later. And it is from the same as 3391. And it just says the moon. So it's the noun, the literal moon in the sky. And the word Yarako, Yarako for Jericho, is number 3405. Now, the interesting thing is that 3405 is not very far away from 3394. It's in the same family of words. So when you're in your Strong's Concordance, you can just run down from 3394 and you can just read all those family words and look at the definitions. And we're going to do that one of these times. But 3391 is the primitive root. So we'll look at that the next time as well. But 3405 definitely links to Jericho, and is a city that worshiped the moon. Now, I want to give a caution. There are many people that use Brown Drivers Briggs as a reference and a study tool, and I have found that you can't always trust Brown Drivers Briggs. Sometimes he has just wonderful information, and sometimes he has not enough information, and in this case, he does not even take 3394 back to the original root of 3391. So if you're studying just in Brown Driver Briggs, you may not get all the leads that you need to have. So if you wouldn't find that you had to go back to 3391, and that is something that we need to do, is to check out these primitive roots. 3394 describes the literal moon in the sky. That's what Moses said. That's what he wrote down. I have another question. If Moses wants us to know the moon commences Yahuwah's months, his set-apart month, don't you think that Moses should use 3394, because that's the noun, so that we know for sure that the moon is supposed to commence the month? And don't you think he should have it in Genesis 1? Or at least in Covenant Torah, remember Genesis 1 to Exodus 24:11? Or shouldn't Moses at least tell you somewhere in the Torah if the moon is supposed to commence the month? That was my question. Okay, this is the Englishman's Concordance. In the Strong's, I had 3394. There was 26 listings, or the 26 verses, and in the Englishman's, it had exactly the same verses. And I know you probably can't see that, but when you have a chance to go through this PowerPoint by yourself, you can look at these verses. They are exactly the same in the Strong's and the Englishman's. There's not one that's different. These are all, you can see on the side there, they're all 3394. There were 26 verses, and I sorted them out into 4 categories. The first category, I called it a prophecy category. There were 5 verses, and this has the first mention of moon in the Torah, and we're going to go through these verses today. The second category had 5 verses, and I'm calling these warning verses, and this was the second mention of moon. So if you go to the second mention of moon in your Torah, you're going to come to a warning verse. The third category was a sign, and there were 10 verses. Now, the sign, the moon being a sign, they're kind of linked to prophecy, so they could kind of cross over a little bit. But this was a third categorical mention, and all of these verses are in non-Torah scriptures. None of these are in the Torah. And then for creation, a category for creation, I found 6 verses. And this was the fourth and the last categorical mention of moon. This is 3394, and these were all non-Torah scriptures. So we're going to go through each of these today, each one of these. Now, what I want you to look for, we're going to look at these 26 verses in these 4 categories. I want you to be really careful and look and see if in any of these verses Moses is telling us that the moon is in charge of the month. That's our search. In Genesis 37:9, this is the very first time moon is mentioned. It's 3394. It's talking about Joseph, and Joseph dreamed yet another dream. And he told it to his brother, and he said, behold, I have dreamed a dream more, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars made obeisance to me. Psalm 72:5. They shall fear thee as long as the sun and the moon endure throughout all generations. Psalm 72:7, 2 verses later. In his days shall the righteous flourish, and abundance of peace so long as the moon endureth. Psalms 121:6. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the new moon by night. Isaiah 60:19. The sun shall be no more thy light by day, neither for brightness shall the moon give light unto thee, but Yahuwah shall be unto thee an everlasting light, and thy God thy glory, thy Elohim thy glory. Yes or no? Did any of the 5 prophecy scriptures command the moon to begin the festal month? Did you see anything? I didn't. Not one of those verses told us that the moon is in charge of starting the month. Well, let's look at 3394 in the warning category. Remember, this is the literal moon in the sky. In this category, you're going to find 5 very strict commands about gazing and or worshiping any of the heavenly bodies. And 2 of these commands are in Torah. And then there's 3 commands that follow in support. I would like you to take careful note of the 2 commands in Torah, that they do not promote the moon is to commence the beginning of Yahuwah's months. So just watch for those. We're going to get to the very first Torah warning. It's in Deuteronomy 4:19. And lest thou lift up thine eyes unto heaven, and when thou seest the sun and the moon and the stars, even all the host of heaven, and you should be driven to worship them and serve them, which Yahuwah thy Elohim hath divided unto all nations under the whole heaven. Does not sound like you're supposed to be lifting your eyes up to the moon. It's a warning. Here's the second Torah warning in Deuteronomy 17:3. I wish I had time to read all of the verses around these. There's about 10 verses. We should be reading them all. But let's do this one right now. And if you have gone and served other gods and worshiped them, either the sun or moon or any of the host of heaven, which I have not commanded. There's another command. Don't be doing this. And before Moses died, he specifically gave these 2 commands as a safeguard from the pagan ways of worship. And the penalty for disobedience was death by stoning. So the message was clear. Don't be worshiping the moon, the sun, the stars, none of the heavenly bodies at all. This is our first non-Torah warning. It's in 2 Kings 23:5. It's talking about King Josiah. And he put down the idolatrous priests whom the kings of Judah had ordained to burn incense in the high places, in the cities of Judah, in the places round about Jerusalem, them also that burned incense unto Baal, to the sun, and to the moon, and to the planets, and to all the host of heaven. So Josiah was putting down the idolatrous priests that were doing these things. The moon was included. Now, this is our second non-Torah warning. It's in Job. And I have a little note here that Job actually lived between the time of Abraham and Moses. Moses was the author of Job's book. So he was living in that time frame. He lived approximately 240 years. I think Abraham lived about 175. So they were approximately in the same time frame. And the question is, would you consider Job to be a covenant Torah patriarch? Because I do. He was living in that time frame. If you do, this quote from Job is of extreme importance, and some feel this should be a covenant Torah warning. You can include me in that. These verses in Job are going to be talking about giving more regard to the sun and the moon than what was ever allowed by Yahuwah. And there are several other scriptures that give the same warning. Job says, if I beheld the sun when it shined, or the moon walking in brightness, and my heart has been secretly enticed, that would be an iniquity to be punished by the judge, for I should have denied the Elohim that is above. A very serious warning from Job. He said, if I would have beheld the sun when it shined, and the moon walking in brightness, looking to it, that's what he's talking about, that his heart is being enticed for something. How many of us have been looking at the moon for a long time and we've been enticed by it? Well, you can look at the moon and enjoy it for its creative, your Creator created it, but not for worship. Our third non-Torah warning is in Jeremiah 8:2. We've already read part of this verse. And the enemy shall spread the bones of Yahuwah's people before the sun and the moon and all the hosts of heaven, whom they have loved and served and walked and sought and they have worshipped. It's a very serious warning from Jeremiah. Jeremiah declares that following this moon month is worship. That's what it is. And it hasn't changed today. So, yes or no? Did any of the 5 warning scriptures command the moon to begin the festival month? Did you notice? And I'm saying absolutely not. Those were warning scriptures to get your eyes off of looking at the moon that has anything to do with a calendar. So we're done with the warning category. Let's look at the sign category. There are 10 verses. I want you to watch and see if any of these verses from scriptures, these are all non-Torah scriptures, okay? If they tell us that the moon is in charge of the month. Joshua 10:12. Then spake Joshua to Yahuwah in the day when he delivered up the Amorites before the children of Israel. And he said in the sight of Israel, Sun, stand thou still upon Gibeon, and thou moon, stand thou still in the valley of Ajalon. And one verse later, and the sun did stand still, and the moon stayed until the people had avenged themselves upon their enemies. And so the sun stood still in the midst of heaven and hasted not to go down about a whole day. Doesn't sound like the moon had anything to do with the month there. In Job 25:5, remember Job, I like him. I think he's a Torah patriarch. Behold, even to the moon, and it shineth not. Yea, the stars are not pure in his sight. Isaiah 13:10. For the stars of heaven and the constellations thereof shall not give their light. The sun shall be darkened in his going forth, and the moon shall not cause her light to shine. Doesn't look like the moon is in charge of the month there. Let's look at Jeremiah 31:35. This is a turning point verse. We are going to look at this in detail at the next teaching. It says, Thus saith Yahuwah, which giveth the sun for a light by day, and the ordinances of the moon and of the stars for a light by night, which divideth the sea when the waves thereof roar. Yahuwah of hosts is his name. And Jeremiah 31:36 is I just want to give you this for the ordinances, okay? If those ordinances, it's 2706, we'll look at that at the next teaching. If those ordinances depart from before me, saith Yahuwah, then the seed of Israel also shall cease from being a nation before me forever. So I want you to watch for information on the ordinances of the moon. We're going to do that in the next teaching. Really important part. We're still working on our sign category in non-Torah books, Ezekiel 32:7. Does he say that the moon is in charge of the month? And when I shall put thee out, I will cover the heaven, and I will make the stars thereof dark. I will cover the sun with a cloud, and the moon shall not give her light. Doesn't sound like it. Joel 2, chapter 10. I love Joel 2. The earth shall quake before them, the heavens shall tremble, the sun and the moon shall be dark, and the stars shall withdraw their light. They're shining. Doesn't sound like the moon's in charge of the month there. What about Joel 2:31? The sun shall be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and terrible day of Yahuwah. Doesn't sound like the moon's in charge of the month. Joel 3:15. The sun and the moon shall be darkened and the stars shall withdraw their shining. These are actually, could qualify as prophecy as well, but remember I told you the sign category is similar to prophecy. What about Habakkuk 3:11? The sun and the moon stood still in their habitation. At the light of thine arrows they went, and at the shining of thy glittering spear. Well, yes or no? Did any of the 10 sign category scriptures command the moon to begin the festal month? Did you notice anything? I didn't. I say no. The moon was not in charge of the month in those 10 non-Torah verses. So we have one more category to go through. It's creation. We're going to be finishing up. Psalms 8:3. When I consider thy heavens, the work of thy fingers, the moon and the stars which thou hast ordained. Doesn't sound like the moon is in charge of a month there. Psalms 89:37. Now, this particular verse is used by quite a few feast teachers to use the moon as in charge of the month. Let's read it. It says, it shall be established forever as the moon and as a faithful witness in heaven. If you read it just like that, it sounds like the moon is in charge of being the faithful witness in heaven, but that is not the context. If you read the verses around 89:37, before and after, it's talking about David's throne in verse 36 that's going to be established. So let me read it this way. When David's throne is established forever, as the sun and the moon, in verse 36 it talks about the moon as the sun as well. When his throne is established forever as the sun and the moon, that is a faithful witness in heaven. David's throne is the faithful witness. It isn't the moon that's the faithful witness. I have seen this as used as a primary verse to establish the moon month, but the moon as a faithful witness links back to the Creator. And then this one, Psalms 104:19. He appointed the moon for seasons. The sun knoweth his going down. Well, that's the first verse that we've come across that looks like the moon is in charge of the seasons. Now, we are not going to deal with that today. That's going to be in the next teaching, and you're just going to love it. So there is a question there. Psalms 136:9. The moon and the stars to rule by night. Is the moon in charge of the month? Psalms 148:3. Praise ye him, sun and moon. Praise him, all ye stars of light. And another one, Ecclesiastes 12:2. While the sun or the light or the moon or the stars be not darkened. And the context of this one here in Ecclesiastes, when you look at verses 1-8, is talking about remembering your Creator in the days of your youth. So we've gone through all of the verses for the creation category. And the question is yes or no. Did any of the 6 creation category scriptures command the moon to begin the festal month? And except for that one, the answer is no. That one verse, Psalms 104:19, we're going to study that one next week. But otherwise, the answer is no. So the summary of these 26 verses for 3394 for moon, that is the noun. The prophecy had 5 verses. The prophecy had the very first mention in the Torah. And most often when you find first mention, that is the main mandate of the moon. So it was Joseph's dream. So prophecy is one of the main mandates for the moon. The second mention for the moon was warning. 2 of them in Deuteronomy, 2 of them out of the 5 verses. The other ones were in non-Torah books. There were 10 that were in the sign category. That was the 3rd time the moon came up in the scriptures. And then creation had 6 verses. And we didn't really find any of those 26 verses that said that the month commences with the moon. But I really feel that 3394 is the best choice to establish the moon for the festival month out of all of the choices of our numbers. But Moses did not use it once. And everybody, it was for a very good reason. We are going to find out about that. Very good reason. And that is the end of part 1 for the moon, oh the moon, because we're going to have a part 2 for this particular section. It'll be looking at 3394 again, and we're going to look at the ordinances of the moon, specifically with Jeremiah 31:35, and we will be breaking open Psalms 104:19 as well. So that's our presentation for today. We got through it. And again, if anybody needs assistance with this information, and you don't, you're just too shy to ask your questions today, you can always send them in to myself or to Timothy. And there's the email addresses at Torah to the Tribes. And I've got Tim's Gmail there as well, in case you can't get a hold of us through Torah to the Tribes. So that's it.
Thank
I
you,
will
Charlene.
take my...
Thank you, Charlene. And thank you, Abba, Father, for your word that is alive and full of evidence and power. Not by blind faith, but the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things that are seen sometimes. So thank you so very much, Charlene. I don't know about you, but I'm really looking excited for next week's, or the next lesson, part 2. Charlene shared some of the things that she's going to be covering in that lesson. So for those of you that are on YouTube, stay tuned. Wait for that video. I'm sure it's going to be superb. So again, thank you for joining us tonight on YouTube. And okay, for our own group, we're going to go ahead and ask a couple questions, if that's okay, for those that like to stay on for a little bit. And I'd like to start with a question, if that's okay. Yes, that's okay. I see a head shaking. When you were referring to the equinox happening, I just want to confirm that event took place on the entire planet at the same time, right? I know that you noticed, or that you mentioned the northern hemisphere, but that event, doesn't it take place across the entire planet at the same time there on the equinox?
Yes, it does. I mentioned the northern hemisphere because it's spring in the northern hemisphere. March 21 is spring for us. In the southern hemisphere, it's their fall. So that's why I said yes. But equinox happens for everyone around the world at the same moment. Mm-hmm.
So then that would kind of line up with Yahusha said it is finished at the exact same moment for everybody across the entire planet at the same time.
Yeah.
No, I just want to make sure. Okay. I got it. Thank you. This was fabulous. Thank you. Any other questions, anybody? I noticed that there were some questions in the chat. Does somebody want to maybe scroll through the chat and pull up those questions? I see Hendry's got his finger up. Go ahead, brother. I see your lips, but I'm not hearing you.